he's gotten nowhere with Russia. And Putin just knows that he's kind of this foppish ego that he can fool around with. He probably, I can imagine what the phone call's like. Oh, you're so smart. You're so great. I'd love to be as rich as you. I mean, who knows? He just knows what he has to do. And he was an undercover spy for years and charmed and frightened people his entire career. So he knows what to do. And, Trump is just, I think he's got a blind spot concerning this. He also, quite rightly, wants to avoid World War III with Russia. So, maybe Putin drops and insinuates things that frighten him. But what's interesting is that, there's now open talk in Berlin about Germany getting a nuclear bomb.
Hello and welcome to Frontline for Times Radio. I'm Louis Sykes. Today we're joined by Diane Francis, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council in Washington. She's editor-at-large with the National Post newspaper and has a best-selling Substack with regular updates on geopolitics and the war in Ukraine. Diane Francis, thank you very much for joining us today.
Good to be here again.
Well, today Trump has called Putin crazy in a Truth Social post, and he's then told reporters that he's not happy with the Kremlin over these huge strikes on Ukraine over the weekend. But is the Kremlin really going to care about, words alone?
Well, this follows his 2-hour phone call with Putin, which appears to have been a love-in, after which he described him as a lovely gentleman. And then Putin just, gave him the finger and bombed the heck out of Kyiv. I mean, one of the worst ever, 2 nights in a row. So, this is, he doesn't care. He doesn't care, and Trump doesn't get it. He's sort of, debating and talking to a fictitious character that he's made up in his mind. Either that or he's, involved in cahoots, but I don't think that's the case. But yeah, no, it's that's Putin. He doesn't care.
And the Kremlin have responded to this by calling Trump emotional, but then on the other hand, thanking him for pushing for this ceasefire, which is even more perplexing, because why is it that they would push for a ceasefire in a way when they clearly don't actually want one, or keep turning it down when it's presented to them?
I think it's just to buy time. Every day they're talking or having a love-in or a hate-in or whatever's going on. He's grabbing a few more feet of territory. He basically, the message left by his first bombing attack immediately after the call was, hey, the war isn't over. I don't care. I'm continuing. And, I intend to take more territory.
Well, Trump has further warned in those comments that if Putin did try to take the rest of Ukraine, it would lead to Russia's downfall. Now, those are just words, but in a way, is he right? And perhaps more importantly, how's Putin going to feel about those comments?
Well, Putin doesn't take any notice of anything anyone says. He wants to recreate the USSR. Ukraine's just the beginning. And, that's his intention. But I think that when he talks about ruining Russia, there is only one thing that could really do major damage. And that's something that he did not invoke when he was talking to him on the phone. And that is the fact that Congress has prepared a diabolically draconian set of tariffs against all of Russia's oil customers of 500%. This means China and India. It means everybody. It means Hungary and Serbia, everybody who's, accessory to the enemy. And if those were imposed, that would dry up his oil revenue. And that is how he finances the war. It would also discombobulate all of his allies. And so, he's got it within his reach right now, Trump, without getting involved in military action. He's got it within his reach right now to just give permission to the Senate and the House to proceed with what apparently already has enough votes to proceed, and that is 500% tariffs on anybody who buys Russian oil.
And how much of a message does that send then to Russia's allies as well? I mean, we already know that Russia's been struggling with the reduction in the oil price on the world stage. This is something that Putin is actually going to be worried about, isn't it?
Worried is not the right word. I think he takes note of it, but I think I think he's figured out Trump. Trump is all, as they say in Texas, all hat and no cattle. He's not following through. He has this procedure, this process, which I think I mentioned in my recent Substack, that's now been nicknamed Taco. And that is Trump always chickens out. He'll announce something and then he'll back off. And he's done this with every tariff deal, with everything. And so I think Putin doesn't believe, I think he's lost his credibility. And I think Putin is fearless too.
And you've written in your Substack article today about this worrying move by Putin, which I suppose shows where his mind is at on this. He's tried to sort of declare the breakup of the USSR as having been illegal. I mean, that's surely a clear sign of Putin's aspirations on the world stage.
100%. It looks like a little bit of legislative fiddling, but he's the dictator. And what he did was he's broadcasting the fact that he really, really means it. If he is saying that the breakup of the USSR is illegitimate, then that is why he is going after Ukraine, which left after the USSR broke up. He also is signaling that he is interested in the Baltics, which were part of the USSR, and then the Warsaw Pact countries like Poland and Romania and so on, Hungary, and that he's also interested in recapturing Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. Now, is he putting troops on the line yet about this? No, but his intention now is extremely clear, and his ruthlessness has been established. So this marks kind of a acceleration in his imperialist ambitions, I would say.
And all of this, as we're speaking, is following, as we've mentioned, those massive drone and missile strikes over the weekend. I think it was one of the largest drone strikes, if not the largest, of the whole war. I mean, if Putin just continues to intensify this air campaign while ignoring a ceasefire, what sort of impact does that have on Kiev and Ukraine supporters elsewhere in the world, and Ukraine supporters in America outside of the White House, people like Lindsey Graham?
Look, Ukrainians would rather be dead than under Russia's boot again. They are fearless, they are courageous, they are resolved. They have put up with more punishment than is imaginable because they simply have to and will. They've lost much of a generation of young men on the battlefield or to dreadful permanent injuries for the rest of their lives. And they are unbelievable. And I think the world sympathizes. And Zelensky continues, despite people getting mad at him, like the president of the United States, he continues to soldier on, on behalf of his people. So I think that Ukrainians continue to be backed by most clear-thinking human beings on the planet. And I think that the Europeans are getting their act together finally.
And meanwhile, this inaction in the White House, in a way, and almost friendliness in many cases towards Putin, that's not really doing Trump many favors at home in the US, is it?
No, it isn't. And the polling shows that Ukraine is the victim here. Everybody knows this. And people would like Russia to stop behaving the way it's behaving. I do also want to make a point, however, that Trump rhetoric and games aside, the Americans are providing an enormous amount of expertise, intelligence, and surveillance capability and satellite capability. And they're doing that for the Ukrainian military war effort. So they're not sitting back doing nothing like a lot of countries are. And then at the same time, you have some very dramatic moves that are being made in Europe. Britain has always been a stalwart, and so has Poland. But I am really quite pleased at the new leader of Germany, Friedrich Merz. He is doing something very meaningful.
And I do want to come on to Europe in just a moment, but just finally on Trump and his comments today. I mean, do you think in a way then that Putin and the Kremlin have essentially figured out how to defang Trump? or is there at some point a breaking point between Trump and Putin?
Trump is shocking to me. He really is. I think his ego is in the way of his rationality. He thinks he's a great deal maker. He has gotten nowhere with Israel. He's gotten nowhere with Iran. He's gotten nowhere with Russia. And Putin just knows that he's kind of this foppish ego that he can fool around with. He probably, I can imagine what the phone call's like. Oh, you're so smart. You're so great. I'd love to be as rich as you. I mean, who knows? He just knows what he has to do. And he was an undercover spy for years and charmed and frightened people his entire career. So he knows what to do. And, Trump is just, I think he's got a blind spot concerning this. He also, quite rightly, wants to avoid World War III with Russia. So, maybe Putin drops and insinuates things that frighten him. But what's interesting is that, there's now open talk in Berlin about Germany getting a nuclear bomb.
And I do want to come on to that now, as we said, because Germany has really become quite crucial, having previously had a very laid back position in a way on Europe's role in this support for Ukraine and conflict with Russia, isn't it?
Yeah, Germany is a crucial player and always has been. In fact, it's impeded Europe from, number one, recognizing the Russian threat by, endorsing the Nord Stream pipeline and all kinds of other silly things. Number two, it's important because it's so rich. It's the fourth biggest economy in the world. And so they have a big wallet. Now they're building an army. Now they're talking about nuclearization. Now they're really upset, and they have this new president that is absolutely in favor of joining Swarmer and Macron and Poland in building a big military presence in Europe to protect it from Russia. So this is huge, and I think perhaps the most dramatic event that characterizes the change in Germany is that for the first time since the Second World War, they have placed troops outside their borders, and now they have thousands of troops in Lithuania, which is obviously a vulnerable border nation that Russia has its sights on. So they're going right into the military side of it.
And you mentioned the nuclearization topic there. I mean, how close or serious do you think Germany is about acquiring their own nuclear deterrent?
Well, there's chatter about it. And remember that, Britain and France are already nuclear powers. And there are some, I'm sure, silos and nuclear facilities in Germany, as there is in Italy and all throughout Europe, that ring Russia. I don't think it would be very hard for Germany to get up to speed in terms of, either through sharing agreements with Britain and France or by virtue of their own technological expertise. And this is a very advanced country in terms of all kinds of things. So if they feel the need to protect themselves with a nuclear weapon, and by the way, Poland has also talked about this, then I think we're going to see the nuclearization of a European collective armed forces. With what they also need to do is build a golden dome over Ukraine and Europe against attack from Russia, Iran, or whoever.
And is there enough in that to really deter Russia? Because there is a lot of chatter even from America and from Europe's allies that there just isn't enough political will or even capability, military capability, to deter Russia from continuing to expand in Ukraine or possibly even into a NATO member state. Do you think Europe really can show to Russia through this that they are serious and there cannot be any further encroachment?
I think they can. Germany is talking about 5% of its GDP in military spending. And, they will have the expertise and the technology and personnel and all of the rest of it from the United States to utilize. They will build up their forces and so on. Will this stop Russia? No, because they're not directly mano a mano on the battlefield against them. But I would suggest that this may happen accidentally or purposely. And then we're in for something that's potentially very frightening, which is America, NATO getting involved directly in fighting Russia.
And off the battlefield, Europe are pushing ahead with these sanctions that were proposed over a week ago now. Um, are they going to have an impact alone, or are we really just waiting for the US to come to the same conclusion and put their own sanctions on?
I think a pile on is necessary. I think that Europe's 17th package of sanctions is helpful. The other thing that I like about the new Chancellor of Germany, Merz, is that he is pushing to seize the $300 billion frozen of Russian assets and allocate it to Ukraine's defense and or rebuilding. Their 5% totals a $500 billion. This is not kids play money. Germany is phenomenally wealthy, and so if you've got this kind of backing, Russia's not going to stop what it's doing because it doesn't need to, but when it needs to, it will.
And what other actions should we be watching for from Europe that could also have an impact?
Well, I think that diplomatically, Europe is going to continue to be important. I think isolating Putin and Russia, the oil thing has to be attacked. I think what I like the best about their new sanctions are, although I don't think they go far enough, but they're now going to target the shadow ships that enable the cash flow for the war by stopping the oil tankers from going through the Black, Baltic, and whatever seas to get to China and India and make a lot of money. If you have the shadow navy being attacked at the same time, Lindsey Graham, the senator in the U.S., has his bill, his 500% tariffs put on China and Russia for buying oil from China and India for buying Russian oil. I think you've got a two-punch knockout here. And that could be, even if not fully implemented, going to be extremely difficult. I don't see him surrendering, but I see him maybe de-escalating and just hoping that just keeping it where it is. I mean, he's grabbed 20% of the country.
And, we talk a bit about the battlefield there. Of course, Ukraine are continuing their own direct strikes on Russian oil infrastructure, aren't they? That's going to have an impact too, isn't it? And that really is going to grab the Kremlin's attention, right?
It is, and I think it already has. And I think that with the muscular backing of Germany and Europe and the Americans continuing, you're going to see them being able to do with impunity more of these attacks inside Russia, which isn't going to bring down his regime, but is going to be annoying. And hey, may have a lucky target, may hit the lucky target. He came very close to being assassinated recently by a Ukrainian drone that took down a helicopter at his fleet. He's had very important brass military and other people around him assassinated by Ukrainian special operations. They're all over the place. And the Ukrainians are really good at what they do. And they're getting in there, they're destroying facilities, they're impeding oil flows, they're doing whatever they can. And so this is maybe another reason why Putin isn't going to look for an exit right away, but he'll welcome an exit that gives him some kind of reasonable glory.
And as you say, there really was something of a close call for Putin recently, in that I believe it was on his visit to Kursk. On the return from that, his helicopter was essentially caught up in the middle of this strike. The Russian military seemed to try and project that as some sort of victory, but that's really going to put the dampeners on Putin's visit to Kursk to kind of try and project a sense of victory, isn't it?
Well, I think the important thing, and also we saw that, remember, he wanted to make a big charade out of his victory day in May by inviting all the heads of state, and most of them didn't go because it was, and he actually asked Ukraine to hold off on attacking Moscow during his parade, and they wouldn't, of course, give him that promise. And if they could have, they would have. But it did keep a lot of people away from it. It was embarrassing. It showed weakness, and I think he's got to understand that his days are numbered, and his military is still not performing very well in the battlefield.
And we've been talking a lot about the move from Europe and Germany to militarize more. But is that really what's going to what is going to worry Putin more? Is it that European militarization at home, or should some more of that effort be going into supporting Ukraine, do you think?
Well, I think he's worried. I mean, I think what he's been trying to do is divide the U.S. and Europe, and he's done a pretty good job of doing that so far. They've done it to themselves. I think, though, however, what I wanted to point out in my article recently is that Trump is talking about 50% tariffs against European manufactured goods, which is opening up a second problem for Europe. However, what's going to be funny to watch is that those tariff talks will go very nicely on on Europe's behalf, because Europe now, with Germany involved, is going to be buying billions, hundreds of billions of dollars of military expertise, technology, equipment, weapons, and ammo to gear up itself and help Ukraine. And they'll be buying it from the US defense industry. And so they have a stick to hold over his head. And that is, we're going to buy a lot of stuff from you guys. Just stop with this tariff business, or we'll throw tariffs up on you.
And I suppose through the wallet really does seem to be the way to negotiate with Trump's administration on support for Europe and Ukraine. I mean, there was another line out of the G7 finance ministers meeting just last week, which, they, including the US's Scott Bessent, condemned Russia in quite strong words that we haven't seen from this administration. And they've said, most crucially, I think you mentioned this in your article, that they want to keep those confiscated Russian assets frozen. What does that mean for the Kremlin?
That's a huge blow. That's a big problem. I'm not sure they were counting on them to ever come back, anyway. But it's embarrassing, and it really represents just about all the foreign income that they made for a decade or more. This was put away in piggy banks and central banks around the world because they weren't in foreign exchange currencies, and they will not get that back. So essentially, 10 years of trading on behalf of Russia with the rest of the world has all been for naught. And that's got to be annoying, because I don't know, he can't replace that, because his economy is just strictly wartime, and there's nothing going on there. There's no foreign direct investment. There's no growth. I think it's just it's going to fall apart eventually.
And I just want to finish on this, Diane. Your most recent Substack article was called Ukraine's Plan B. And I suppose the gist of it really is that there is going to have to be more of a reliance on Europe for Ukraine. Do you think that there is enough time now for Europe to fill in, if not all of the US's support, enough that Kiev can negotiate their way through to getting a resumption on some level of US support for their fight against Russia?
Well, it's a tall order, but I think they have to do it. I think the other thing that may happen is that the US will remain, and its might and its military help will remain in place every bit as seriously as it has been in the past. The only difference is that the Europeans will pay for it. They will hire it. It'll be once removed. And that will benefit Trump, because, as you said, to play with your words, the way to Trump's heart is through the wallet. And Europe is going to become the biggest customer for the United States in short order, because they have to bear the burden of the war.
Well, Diane Francis, thank you very much for speaking with me today on Frontline.
You're welcome.
Thank you for watching Frontline for Times Radio. For more on the war in Ukraine, you can sign up for membership at the link below, or subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also listen to the latest news and analysis on Times Radio, or read it on thetimes.com. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.